innovation with over 15 years experience in enterprise business and product strategy, design and execution. And some of the brands in his portfolio are Racing.com, NAB, and Australia Post. Marty Brown is also joining us from Melbourne. He is a multidisciplinary design lead with, again, over 15 years of experience at top-tier consulting firms, including 7 years at IDEO in London and Tokyo. He is currently design lead at Craig Walker Design and Innovation. An example of his work include IKEA's Concept Kitchen 2025. I would have loved to see that. Concept store design for Ray-Ban, which opened in Soho in New York in 2017, and a complete digital strategy for the Times newspaper. He's currently working with Facebook, helping them engage with regulators, privacy experts, and product developers through human-centered design methodologies. Hi, Marty. Mark Etten is joining us from New York. So he is a business design lead at Fjord Studio over there. And some of his recent work includes Design Thinking Academy training for Accenture, also a keynote presentation on design thinking for social impact. He also worked as a service designer for the ING Bank. So due to the time difference between Australia and New York, Mark will take part in our discussion via recording. Next up joins us Jesse Grimes. So Jesse is the Vice President and Editor-in-Chief of its, Vice President of Global Service Design Network, also known as SDN, and Editor-in-Chief of its journal Touchpoint. He's also the co-founder and head of training for the Service Design Network Academy. And he runs a meetup of over 1,000 service designers across the Netherlands and creates partnerships between the Service Design Network and other international organizations to elevate the role and recognition of design and service design worldwide. Hi, Jesse. And finally, we have Ellie and Chrissy from Bulgaria. Ellie to the left, Chrissy to the right. Ellie is the CEO and Chrissy is the strategy director of Launch Lab Sofia, which is based in Bulgaria, part of an international network with offices in Berlin, Basel, and even Bangalore. Launch Labs is a business redesign studio that helps companies build agile teams and create innovative customer-centric experiences for their clients. And Ellie and Chrissy and their team have worked with Fortune 500 companies, as well as startups, public institutions, NGOs, to prepare them for business as unusual situations like the current one with COVID-19. Thank you all so much for taking time to talk to us today. It's slightly unusual for Service Design Melbourne to run panel discussion with international presence. And, you know, as the saying goes, there's a silver, there's a silver lining and in every cloud. And running our event online as opposed to in person has allowed us to go global for once, which is super exciting. So the agenda for today, what we're going to cover briefly is we're going to start with Jesse, who will take us through a global survey that SDN completed on the impact of COVID-19 on practitioners, which will then set the tone for the discussion around how COVID has impacted other markets such as Australia, US, and Europe. And then Chrissy and Alina will take us through the necessity to intersect design disciplines and methodologies to solve problems in new ways to adapt to the current situation. Then Kelvin is going to talk about the importance for designers today to upskill and cross-skill. And finally, Marty will take us through a few strategies on how to keep inspired, motivated, and creative in a working from home environment. So the last 20 minutes of today's session will be for audience Q&A. So due to the nature of the online we have muted all participants because taking questions from the audience throughout the session is just too hard and disruptive. Sincere apologies for this. However, you can still ask your questions directed at each speaker in the Zoom chat throughout the session, so please do so. Erin will ask your questions at the end in the Q&A session. And so when you type your question, please start with the name of the panelist the question is directed to, so we know who to unmute effectively. And since Mark is not online at the moment, if you have any questions for him, please still type them in. We will send them to Mark. He will get back to us and we'll publish all the questions in Slack. And that's true basically for all questions we don't manage to go through today. Finally, this session will be recorded and we'll distribute it across Slack, LinkedIn, the Service Design Melbourne mailing. Please feel free to share it with your networks if you feel this is relevant. And yes, let's get straight into it. So Jessie, you're kicking this off with the survey across the Service Design Network, across practitioners. So this project is super intriguing. Can you please tell us a bit more about it and what you've learned?
Sure. So the Service Design Network, again, is a global organization. We've been around since about 2004, and we do lots of activities to try to bring our community together, both around events and content and things like that. And one of the things, of course, when this COVID crisis started was to try to understand from our global community how it was impacting them. So we ran the survey over about 2 weeks, and we closed it about 2 weeks ago. So this was stemmed from our interest about saying what was happening in the community, both practitioners, people doing service design in-house, but also people in the academic community, for example. So what I can share today is some highlight results that we've got from this survey, which I think give some interesting insights. And I think the last slide specifically ends kind of on a good note. So I'm happy to walk you through it. This was done in total with about 90 people and a good cross-section of people from around the world. In total, it was 25 different countries who responded, or people from 25 countries. You can see a little bit, of course, the SDN, while it's global, is based in Germany, so Germany is highly represented here. But otherwise, this is a pretty globally representative survey. So if we go to the next one, we did ask actually where people are working from. This does broadly, I think, represent who is active in our community. It's a lot of people as practitioners in the private sector or working for agencies, and a smaller mix of people in academia, freelancers, also such as myself, fit in that category, and then people working in the public sector, whether for agencies who only work for the public sector or agencies or public sector in-house, so within government or healthcare, for example. So if we go on to the next one, this could be, I think, perhaps also a predictable result, but maybe not so negative as you could think. Just over half of people, when we asked them what impact has it had so far, so thinking again, this is up to 4 weeks ago, up until 2 weeks ago, only about half said it was very specifically negative. Some people actually have felt that this was a positive impact on their organization, and almost 20% had not yet seen an impact. I think that's kind of interesting. Let's go on to the next one, and this is actually what the specific concerns are. Now, of course, the financial ones show up here in the fact that 61% of people were saying that this crisis has led to lost income and cash flow problems, and also reduced performance in terms of how we're all having to adapt to working remotely, and of course, as designers, also not being able to run workshops in the way we're used to. But what's also interesting is that more than half of people were saying there was a concern for their staff and people's personal welfare. So that was what's concerning people as they reported it. The next slide is to what extent people think they will have a change in their situation in the second half of this year. Just over half also, what I find interesting, say that they think it will improve somewhat. So that's not a across the board negative outlook on the future. But when we asked people, almost half said it will either improve to a certain degree or significantly improve. And a fifth say they think it will worsen a bit or significantly, or a quarter, I should say. We did also want to look at what changes that people have reported observing within their organization. Two of them are, of course, really specifically about projects, and this is represented by how many agencies or practitioners are among the respondents. But 65% saying they're not picking up new projects. However, some of them are actually getting new projects, 24.7% there. I'd be interested personally also to dive into that. What is triggering new service design projects to be picked up nowadays, and in what areas are they? Is it healthcare, for example? Is it things in the public sector? But on the flip side of that, just over half were saying that they're losing project work. So I think that could be accepted as well, expected. The others, we had lots of different others, so I put those down again at the bottom. I will say, so I don't forget it at the end, this will be published and shared within the SDN community, so you'll have access to that not only from today's event, but our report as well. If you go to the next slide, this is now how people are responding. So what measures have people in their organization take to respond to this COVID crisis? From a financial perspective, of course, people are halting investments and trying to scale back or suspend the business a little bit and reduce their workforce. But also, interestingly, 20% of these people that responded have actually made no real action so far. So that probably correlates, I guess, with the people who were not affected. But it was interesting to see this broad split around what people are doing in reaction to it. If you go on to the next one, so there are two more slides here. What are the long-term strategies that people are reporting to be putting in place to ensure a good future for their organizations? And I found this one also really interesting. 64% of people said that they are looking to get into new areas of business. Now, we weren't able to dive into that and see what they mean, but I found that interesting. And also reaching out and finding new customer groups. I can assume if this is practitioners, maybe you have agencies who are really focused on one sector, or their specialism is in one sector. But almost half of people say they're trying to find new customer groups. This could also, of course, be in-house practitioners or someone working for a company, and the company themselves are diversifying. I can't really pick that apart, but these were the findings here. And as a last slide, we looked at, okay, beyond financial assistance, what type of support are the community looking for to help manage these challenges, both today and coming up? And as I said, it's a nice way to end the insights from the survey. Almost 60% of people were looking for community exchange as a way to address this. So that would be, I guess, around ways of working, how we work remotely, what kind of tools we do, how we adapt our practices. And then a similar mix for getting guidance from the government, getting coaching. And then also, of course, online training. We're seeing that also from our organization as well, in the absence of face-to-face events and face-to-face training, but still with people wanting to pick up new skills, we're seeing a move and a wish towards more online training. So that's it. The next slide is my last one. Again, this is part of research we've done and we'll share back with the community. So please do join, if you're not already, members of our social media and things like that, and you'll be notified when the report comes out. So thanks for letting me share this with you.
Thank you so much, Jesse. That's really interesting. Kelvin, you guys, well, you run a medium-sized design consulting firm in Melbourne. Has anything of what Jesse mentioned resonate with what you guys at OVO have observed?
Sorry, beyond the obvious factors of the financial hesitations, the pausing on work. It feels counterintuitive to exactly what companies need to be doing versus the obvious uncertainty we're all feeling, and therefore the hesitation on investing areas they know they should. So it resonates really strongly. The clients that we speak to know that they should be looking more importantly than ever on their holistic service offerings, how they're servicing their customers, their users. But it's coming from the top down. So things are getting paused. It's almost death by numbers at the moment. Not really looking into what's going to have the long-term impact. So what we're finding at the moment is that it's gone into reactive mode. So it's what do we need to do now? What do we need to do quickly? Throw the playbook, throw the roadmap out the window, and let's focus on the things we need to do. And so what we're tending to find is that there's now a bypassing of the actual learning experience. So the new norm is to get everyone in a room. I would call it navel gazing, figuring out ourselves, using internal subject matter expertise to come up with really short-term solutions, run that through the machine, get that going, and don't worry about what the former objectives and goals were pre-corona. So we feel like there's a lot less time being spent on actually understanding user needs and mapping those pain points and desired experiences. It's really coming down to what they deem. So design sprints seem to feel like it's made a return, but not in the right way. So I'm an advocate for things like design sprints when they're done in the right way, when they are done to take a well-defined problem definition statement, run that through a design and sketch, and then making sure that it's put in front of the hands of users for validation. We've spoken to 2 or 3 customers now in the last week and a half that are using design sprints internally, piecemealing it together to get a prototype up to move forward to get things done. And it could be due to regulatory issues, it could be just an outcry of customer needs. But again, it all feels extremely reactive to us at the moment. We've spoken to some universities over the last few weeks. We've spoken to some non-for-profit, and again, they all understand the need for things like service design, service blueprinting, for CX and research. It's both the capacity and being blinded by the fear at the moment, to be frank.
Thank you. Marty, do you agree with what Jesse and Kelvin mentioned? And have you guys at Craig Walker found any other trends?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely it's a challenging time. I think, the first point is obvious, is that a lot of our bigger clients have just hit the pause button on things because, like, frankly, things have just been changing so quickly that it's, whatever was the best of well-laid plans 3 months ago, like, we just live in a very different world now. And we don't know how that's going to, how long the current situation is going to play out. We don't know what some very fundamental aspects of how we're living our lives are actually going to evolve. And that really does impact on how services need to be designed, because our behavior is changing incredibly quickly. These new norms are settling in, and we don't know how long they're going to stay the way they are. We did an event for Melbourne Design Week around the future of the pub at the old bar, and that was 3 days before the lockdown. And so, whilst we know that there's going to be a future of a pub, and the pubs need to exist in the fabric of society. What that looks like right now is incredibly difficult to answer. So that's quite, I think that's quite a challenge. I think this is kind of, I think, how we're feeling all the time, is what's going to happen next. And so, yeah, I think if we just go to the next slide, I think that basically like clients have just been focusing on, you know, as Kelvin said, what's the mission critical stuff? Like what's the stuff that we can't not keep moving on? And a lot of the things that have been more speculative or exploratory have been put on pause. And I think that's a relatively wise idea, just given the fluency of how the world is changing right now. I think the second thing that's really interesting is just that, you know, we are, you know, clients who have a certain amount of inertia are all of a sudden finding that they're actually able to move really quickly because they have to. An example of that was did some work when I was actually with Fjord a few years ago with a centre group in Westfield, and there was some digital customer experience work.
Who will talk about the service design situation in Bulgaria, and because they have a view of the market in Germany and Switzerland, they'll give us some more of a rounded view around Europe. Over to you, ladies.
Hi everyone, can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. So Iva, we've split the work, so I'll cover the topic and give you an update on Eastern Europe and where we have offices from Western Europe, and then Chrissy will follow with melting disciplines, the topic on melting design disciplines. Just because we're not together, just like everyone else, we're working remotely, and so it was easier for us to do it this way.
Great.
Okay, so I'll give you a tiny little background on the Central Eastern European market, which is, I think, very different from what you guys know in Australia, from the US market, and definitely different from Western European market when it comes to service design and related disciplines. So the Central Eastern European market, the CE market as we call it, is lagging a little bit behind in terms of understanding and appreciation of disciplines like service design, like design thinking, and the agile methodologies. COVID-19, I think, did us a good favor with regard to this, because I believe interest spiked a little bit during this time, even though it didn't result in outsourcing and co-creation work with professional agencies in the field. But I think looking at, you know, the numbers from our website and a few, you know, targeted articles that we released, there is more interest than before the crisis. And that's normal because people are looking for ways to redesign services, to digitize services, to optimize processes. So it's normal that there is interest. It doesn't result in work because the sales cycles are longer than the lockdown. Essentially, you know, you need much more time to build trust with the client, to present your portfolio, etc., and start working on a project. In general, the market is famous for open trust. There is the need to, you know, communicate for longer to build trust. That is the reason, also combined with, you know, just general lagging behind in all sorts of trends, that trainings are not very popular here. We as a company, Launch Labs as a company, we offer two main things. One is training, so we you know, train companies in customer centricity, in agile methodologies, you know, service design, design thinking, etc., Scrum, and we also work with them on real projects. You know, we run actual design sprints with them. And trainings were historically hard to sell here. Why? Because, you know, people don't know these methodologies, they don't understand them fully, they don't appreciate the benefits they bring in an organization. After COVID-19, trainings are impossible to sell. Why? Because when you combine lack of appreciation, lack of understanding with the crisis mode, the urgency to just get work done, the cost cutting, and all these things, they end up in trainings just not being requested. So there is no demand for trainings at the moment. On the project side, as I said, because the businesses here are not so mature. They typically, before the COVID-19, they believed a lot more in projects, because they say, if these methodologies that you're talking about are so powerful, show us, let's do a project, let's see the results. We don't want to buy training in something that we don't understand. So projects historically were relatively easier to sell, and the COVID-19 didn't change this much. So we still work on a lot of projects. However, there is prioritization of projects. We only work on the most strategic, most important projects right now. This is what's changing now. Here, there's some background noise, which I'll try to avoid. So we're working on projects. The type of project that we are doing is mostly with old clients who know us, who trust us, etc. As I said, acquiring a new client on such a short notice, on such urgent circumstances, I don't think it's realistic. A lot of clients just were under pressure to do stuff, so they did it in-house alone. A lot of, I think, new companies may have started some sort of service design projects, but under a lot of pressure, mostly digitizing services, or coming up with, digital bits and pieces of analog services. And this, in my opinion, that's my prognosis for the future, resulted in a lot of bad digital services, which will need to be redesigned when times are quieter. So after the crisis is over, or this first part of the crisis is over, when things settle down, I expect that companies will come back with a lot of requests for redesigning digital services that they released under pressure. So that's one, and maybe even trainings, because they would realize that they did something in a rush, in a non-professional way, and they could have benefited from working with a professional agency, or even getting some formal training. So all in all, I'm positive. I think the COVID-19 crisis did us a favor in the service design community here. It's not easy, but I'm optimistic for the future. And to answer Jesse's question, in one of his graphics, he showed increase in new projects. I can relate to that. Specifically, as I said, from old clients, from trusted, partners, and the industries where we see spikes, unusual spikes, I would say, is NGOs. And my explanation for this is because we are industry agnostic. We work with all sorts of companies, but we see an unusual spike in NGO project work. The reason for this is, in my opinion, because these are very often institutions that work with grants, with pre-approved projects, and they have fixed timeframes. They're responsible to another institution, to beneficiaries who gave them the grant, and they need to follow the deadlines of the project. And they turned to us and companies like us to help them digitize their services. So that's my lame explanation of this spike. No, just empiric, no other evidence than just observations and personal experience. That's on our end.
It sounds like clients being in a rush is very similar to what Kelvin mentioned as well, about the whole design process being shortened in the interest of time. And Chrissy, you mentioned that as a result of COVID, you've adopted a coping strategy, which is essentially which you call disciplines and melting. So can you please take us through this? What does that mean, and how does it work in practice?
Yeah, sure. So building upon, I think, what Ellie said, and what I think will be kind of the highlight of what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. Our business, okay, obviously the world is changing. There are no predefined solutions, no easy formulas anymore. And companies we see are starting to come to us for so many more things than just design sprints or pure service design projects or design thinking projects. I think everyone, especially C2 level upwards leadership, and everyone is just so confused. They're looking for like short-termism more than ever. And they're coming to us with requests that will be more typical to be sent to consultancies or even ad agencies or different projects. So we're getting requests for branding projects. We're getting requests for, you know, process optimization and things that we're experts in, but things that are not really typical. So what we're seeing is the need to really have a really diverse team that manages to have many people in the team which are cross-skilled. Something I think that we're going to talk about after me as well. But at Launch Labs, we really believe in melting disciplines. It's in our positioning. It's something that sets us apart, I guess, from the other competitors on the market. What we do is we really combine different design disciplines, different agile methodologies. And I think this is something that we've been doing before COVID. So before this whole crisis happened, it was a strategic route that we started, that we took upon, and we're seeing that it is the way forward for the future of work, we believe. So having a really diverse team, so you can actually look at as much angles as possible from many different directions, look at an issue and propose novel solutions that before maybe we wouldn't have even thought about. So this actually all stems from the fact that I have a background in brand design, and I brought this expertise into the company when I joined last year. So I'm relatively new to service design as the service design world. But I'm actually seeing how, especially working so closely with Eddie, we're building upon each other's expertise, and we're becoming more and more valuable to clients, not only to clients, but also to ourselves, because at the beginning of the crisis, we lost maybe 100% of our business, our projects, and, you know, closing shop was maybe an option. But thanks to this, I really believe that thanks to the fact that we have many different capabilities in different methodologies and this whole cross-disciplinary approach, I think this helped us survive and innovate internally, and it made us more valuable to our clients. So I really believe this is the way forward. Crossing as many disciplines as possible. I actually see more similarities in most of the design disciplines than differences. It's just the way I see things. And I believe this is the future. I really do, especially for building the new ways of working, which nobody knows what exactly that will be. We're working on it right now, actually creating it right now. Maybe COVID catalyzed it a little bit. So that's our perspective on the future of work and how what we believe we need to do in order to adapt to this business as unusual, as we call it.
Thank you so much for that, Kelvin. That ties in nicely with what you want to talk about, which is essentially for designers, the need for designers to cross-skill and upskill. Do you see this as a coping strategy, or do you, like Christina, think that this is a trend that is going to stay and is going to be defining the new normal? We can't hear you, Kelvin. Hang on. Hang on. I can't hear you.
I've got it.
Oh, you got it.
Okay, sorry.
Okay,
so
cool.
I think we were doing it at the same time. No, absolutely to Christina's point. I think this is now becoming a trend. I sort of look at it not too dissimilar to the way the technology industry went probably about 10 to 15 years ago, where there was specialization into mobile development, web development, DevOps, etc. And as they expanded through, the understanding was that developers needed to become cross-functional, and it felt like that design surged post that, and it was all around creating deep specialization, where we actually started to define our own definitions of what customer experience was, what service design meant, what UX and prototyping meant, as well as what UI and visual design meant. So it's actually, to be frank with you, it sort of spawned our business in a lot of ways. We had a great amount of people that we could start the business with that had deep specialization, but I think now the recognition is that especially for those that are in service design, new to it, or veterans in it, the common question that you're going to get asked is, so if I do this work, and if I do this service blueprint, if I do this journey map, what's the upfront cost? What's the capital expenditure? What's the operational costs going to look like? How's it going to be cost effective for me in the long term? And unfortunately, what's being taken away is coming back to some points we've all made, is coming back to that customer experience or user experience. The offset will be, if we look at human-centered design, desirability, it was the beacon. Now it's going to be, is it feasible? Is it viable? And yes, it needs to string in with the customer as well. So these are some areas that I think, and I'm pushing my team to start opening up and developing their skill sets in. So behavioral economics and patterns, start to look at things through the lens of what's going to be happening in the economy over the next 12 months. What are the microeconomic and what are the macroeconomic patterns? Start to get a really good sense of how industries will evolve and change. I don't know, it might have even been you, Eva, or someone else told me that in 2008 spawned, post the recession, some of the brands that we know today, including Uber and Airbnb, as well as some big brands. So what is that next evolution? Start to get a sense of what's around the corner, at least have some robust research into it so you can stand strong when you've got a thought and opinion on it. More quantitative analysis, more data science, incorporate this into the way you work. It's critical to back it up with data at this point. Qualitative research is always strong, verbatims are always strong, but it's going to need to be backed up with some sense of data science. Understanding UX fundamentals. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to become, a whiz in Sketch and InVision, but it's knowing how to translate your research, your work into things that can start to funnel into something that's living and breathing, something that can be tested and put in the hands of users. As I mentioned before, a broad understanding of what prospective clients are talking about when they're actually talking about, we're putting a freeze on capital expenditure, we're putting a freeze on OPEX. What's their version of that? How long is that going to last? What are the impacts? What are the thresholds to which they're willing to invest? How can you navigate through those discussions? And also, how can you incorporate that into your service design as you're going through, to give them a true sense of their return on investment, which will be a big, big talking point as we move forward in the new world. And as mentioned before, the macro and microeconomics are also really important to understand the landscape.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. It's very interesting. We will continue now with a topic that is very current to the current situation, which is essentially working from home. So while it has been absolutely great to begin with, I'm sure lots of people were very happy with that. It's also exposed a few vulnerabilities and a few challenges, which I suppose are just a natural consequence of doing something for, longer periods of time. Because before, at least in Australia, working from home was more the exception as opposed to the norm, particularly in our line of work. So Marty, why is Craig Walker well equipped to work in this manner, and what can we learn from you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like Craig Walker is kind of based Singapore, Melbourne, and Sydney. So we've kind of been quite used to running in this kind of world, probably not to this extent, but I think like probably all of us are getting, I don't know, like quite bored of just looking at your list of Zoom meetings for the day. And I think, like, you know, at Craig Walker, we're very much emphasizing the design aspect of service design. We've all got kind of very strong craft backgrounds. And I think, you know, to Kelvin's point, you know, we need to widen our scope, but we also need to kind of maintain the fact that we do have craft expertise, and that enables us to see what the design needs to look like and what the implementation challenges are going to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, it's a creative profession. It's not just analysis. So we've been just trying to figure out how do we actually overcome this just lack of outside influence and serendipity. And so there's just a few things that we've been doing, which is basically just trying to find like mandatory serendipity. You know, how do you actually snap out of just that like tyranny of Zoom calls and actually get inspired? And we found the best way to do it is you schedule it. You make another spot in your calendar to actively seek it out. And so some of the things we've been doing in the studio, what we're calling design snacks and design snippets. If we go to the next slide, the one after that, which is basically just getting together as teams and cohorts and just sharing the stuff that's like just exciting us. You know, as visual designers, as interaction designers, as integrated product designers, just spending some time just with our friends at agency in Singapore, just sharing what's getting us jazzed as designers and makers of things, because I think it's really important just to keep that going. And here's just some examples, and I suppose just reaching out across the globe to talk to various ex-colleagues and things. It's been great to actually notice that the world's really flattening, and everybody is actually very keen to jump on a call and do these things. I know that there's daily stand-ups happening at a god-awful time in the US that anyone can kind of plug into. They're called creative collisions. And the other great thing is just that there's a lot of the conferences that, you know, being in Melbourne, there's just not that many conferences that you can go to unless you want to get on a plane. And they're all starting to shift online. And so there's some amazing speakers and there's some amazing content that's just being freely shared. And so it's been really important just to be able to make time to do that. And so I think like trying to mandate that serendipity with your colleagues and with the tribe. So, you know, as somebody with a very strong kind of visual design background, I've been reaching out with people in a similar space and talking to them all around the world, and then just reaching out beyond that, and then just looking at kind of, well, what, like, everybody's got lots of time on their hands, and people are being very giving with learning and sharing the kind of work that they've been doing, which is exactly what we're doing here today. So just making that a very kind of just a very important part of the day, just to make sure that you schedule that in as well. So we've been setting each other challenges around what do we do with little bits of our space, and just keeping, trying to keep us active and inspired, even though we've only got 4 walls to look at sometimes. This is I mentioned Amy Bonsall, an ex-colleague of mine at IDEO. She started something called Creative Collisions, and this is happening at 1 a.m. in the morning. So if you're in Australia and you'd like to join that, reach out to Amy on Twitter and see what you can. But that's just sharing great things that are coming through, and then they're doing a kind of weekly write-up.
Potentially we can get the link. I'll follow that up with you, and I'll post it in our Slack channel so everyone can get access to this.
Great.
So is this an example of the Creative Collisions share?
Yeah, so this is just what's so off the back of the daily stand-ups. They synthesize what are the themes that are emerging from them, and that turned into a Medium article. And I think that's been, getting some really great traction on that.
Great. We'll make sure that we share this with our community. And you've got a mention of a donut here. Grab a remote coffee or a donut.
Oh,
what
yeah.
Is this about?
This is just a service called Donut, which somebody recommended to me, which is it's a Slack plugin that just enables you to kind of go out and grab a coffee, and it's that little prod just to go out and break your routine and just have a random chat with somebody in your organization or in your kind of sphere, and you can just kind of get together, and it will do all the kind of matchmaking and calendar organization around that, just to get you moving when you don't have those hallway conversations and you don't have that kind of random chat at the coffee machine. I think we are relying on digital tools for those kinds of experiences, and it may not be the same thing, but I think it's the best we've got for the moment.
So you have tried this service?
I personally haven't, but I've heard very strong recommendations that it's going well.
Sounds like fun.
Maybe we should add it to the Service Design Melbourne Slack.
I will. Yeah, I definitely will. And I can see how you could meet, totally random and interesting people as a result. So it's always good. Well, thank you so much, Marty. And thank you so much, everyone. I think so far it's been a really intriguing discussion. It's awesome to see how all of us have been coping with the challenges and, all the awesome things that have emerged as a result. We're going to open the floor now to Q&A. So Erin, over to you. Have we got questions from the audience, and for who?
We have a slightly quiet audience tonight, so feel free to post your questions while I put up the first one.
Yeah, cool. I definitely have a few questions. So we discussed that, we're all trying to make things work remotely, and it's sometimes kind of working, sometimes not. My question to let's say we can start with Marty, but feel free to put your hand up to anyone from the panelists that want to answer it. What type of software or tool would you like to have developed to help service designers when working from home? What's missing in the market at the moment? If you could develop the one tool, what would that be?
Oh man, look, I think the one thing that's missing is a more empathic version of Zoom. I think that doing user research, especially that kind of early discovery phase research where you're really actually trying to get to know somebody, it's very, very difficult to do when you're in the very contrived environment of a Zoom call. One of our favorite tricks when we were doing in-home interviews at IDEO was just looking in people's fridges and having a conversation about what's in there. And because it's a really unguarded space, and you find out all kinds of interesting things about the way that they live their lives by looking in those corners. And I think that's the difficult thing.
I totally agree with that.
Zoom, you get what people want to show you, and that's I don't know what the answer around that is, but that's the thing that's missing for me.
Maybe I could jump in with some thoughts here. I'm also doing a project with a client for the last 4 months, and we're in the middle of 2 months of user research that I'm doing in Brazil. So totally another continent, totally another time zone. I'm carrying out the interviews in Zoom, but what we're also considering is sending portable little video cameras by post to people and asking them to actually record a bit of the context that we can't see behind their webcam or outside of their webcam. So I do think that Zoom is it's the go-to for facilitating workshops nowadays. It's the go-to for trying to do user research, but it is very limiting. And I think we need other ways to get that kind of insight we would have in face-to-face experiences. I also know from trying to facilitate workshops, when you're missing as a facilitator the reactions of people and people are off in breakout rooms doing things, that's a real challenge. And Zoom wasn't ever designed to really accomplish that in a good way. So I'm hoping we see better solutions there.
Jesse, may I just ask, I didn't quite understand, why are you sending people portable cameras when everyone's got a phone with a camera? Or is that for a different purpose?
Be somehow separate than the personal device that they have, and also not thinking that they are, that it was part of a research tool, actually, that was from kind of like a diary study could have been done then on paper and pencil, but something that belonged to us, that was in their environment for a short amount of time, that they used to show things that they were comfortable with. For those reasons.
Okay, thank you.
So I might jump in
Sure.
with one. So one of my co-founders and head of technology is a bit too bleeding edge for me sometimes, but he wanted me to experiment with a piece of software called screen.so, and it's built for developers, but it was pretty horrific and awe-inspiring at the same time. So basically, it extended beyond VC. And he was able to get into pretty much, I opened up a small code base, and he was able to start getting into my computer and manipulating, work in essence. But it sort of takes the extent beyond just the VC into a far more collaborative. So it's not, imagine Miro on steroids, basically, where he's literally taking pieces and aspects of the work I'm doing, and we're rejigging it together in full collaboration. So I would love to see where that goes and how far it takes it, and how that, although it's been built for developers, how does that translate for design in full co-design experiences?
Hopefully there would be some pretty switched on entrepreneurial people on this webinar that would take those ideas
right now. So look up screen.so and turn it into a co-design platform, and I will love you forever.
Nice one. Okay, I've got one question. Actually, two more. Do we have any more from the audience, Erin?
We actually have 4 flooding in right now. So, all right, I'll put the first one through. Alrighty. So based on this participant, they'd be interested to understand how the appetite of using design to direct decision making through scenarios and other tools varies at a middle management versus an executive level. And this is to the entire panel.
I'm happy to take that one again. So where it's really starting to resonate with middle management, if they can see the fruits of the research and service design, if they can see it being translated into an output, and it doesn't have to go as far as something live, but getting it to a conceptual design stage is absolutely critical. So we had the benefit of working for I would call a middle tier superannuation firm pre-COVID, and it was 8 weeks worth of research, and it had everything. It was everything from service design. It had a restructuring of the information architecture, and then we started to get into UX and UI. And because our UX and UI team were all part of OVO, we were able to translate those designs into something meaningful. So if you were only to look at the research component and service design layer, and then you were to look at the end result, you can see the narrative tie together. You can see how things actually fit. And for those that don't particularly know too much about service design, don't know the impacts to research, if you can show them an end-to-end outcome and they get that visual reference, that's where it's starting to create impact for us when we're going to market and discussing CX and what the impacts of CX mean.
Cool. Anyone else would like to add to that, to the question? Okay. So we have a second question here. How would you suggest people managing user research that usually requires face-to-face research in a location, for example, inside a retail store? And this question is specifically directed to Jesse.
Okay, well, I think if stores are open and customers are in stores, then I'm not sure why we wouldn't be able to also carry out research. Of course, there's all the new, as called in Holland at the moment, the 1.5 meter society. So of course that has to affect how you carry out the research as well as how customers are interacting. But I'm not sure I understand what would be, yeah, what's different here. If the stores are open, if people are in there, we can try to do our research and just adapt it to those new contexts that are in place.
Yeah, if I could jump in, we did an interesting piece of work, which we did some experiments today on it, but we're actually testing it with users tomorrow. But it's actually building kind of 3D representations of a space, and then being able to help somebody walk through that. So it's essentially like it's like an interactive fly through of a space. And obviously it's not the same as the real thing, but when you're talking about experience, like places that people know well, and you're trying to jog their memory about how this experience needs to be, I think that there's some really interesting opportunities that technology can bring to bring those experiences to life for people.
Anyone else would like to add to that? All right. And this is another question to the whole panel. What are the top 3 tips you can share for new or old school social rituals for engaging online when it's hard to read the room or bodily senses? What are you attuning and how are you preparing for that?
I can jump in with one quick reaction. I've run some trainings online, and what I've tried to do is get people in the beginning, at least, to have all their cameras on and do some kind of warm-up activity. I've also used breakout rooms in Zoom to do that, so people can meet at least two other people in a small group, and now that helps for maybe the community feeling within an event. I'm not sure that it helps you as a facilitator understand and react to people in breakout sessions. That's still a challenge. I do think it's important somehow when you're doing activities that involve breakout groups that we have more facilitators than we're used to. And so having facilitators who know the activity, who can help people through it, so they do it in small groups. Otherwise, I think people find themselves in breakout rooms, they forgot the instructions, they slack off a little bit, their camera's off, and then you have nowhere near the productivity you could expect. So I'm not sure that's about the experience so much, but that's just about trying how to make it a bit more successful.
People engage. Yeah. Yes, Kelvin.
I was just going to say, extension to that, Jesse, as well as constantly reaffirming and constantly asking questions. So in the past, if you, and this is sort of making sure that you're forming collaboration, but to Jesse's point, people can switch off if they're hearing your voice again and again and again, and you're not reaffirming. Did you understand that? Have you got any thoughts to that? Get them engaged constantly. Just even write notes to yourself to pause every 2 or 3 slides or whatever you're doing, whether or not, no matter whether you're presenting or collaborating, but constantly reaffirm, constantly get them to engage, making sure that you've got their attention and they've got yours.
And even using the reactions feature on Zoom is good. Having people asking a question, raise your hand if you understand that, raise your hand if you've got a question. That engages people in a way that talking to the screen on its own doesn't really do.
One of my favorite things to do is just make little parking areas for cursors inside Miro or Mural, because people sometimes when they've got nothing to say, the only thing that can represent their whole personhood is this little cursor that's buzzing around a Miro board like a fly. And so just kind of getting people to kind of, all right, everybody come move over to this space over here now. It's a micro dose of engagement, but it's sometimes the best you can do.
No, that's awesome. Alrighty. We honestly have, I think, 3 more questions, but I'm conscious for time as well, so we might not be able to get through all of them. So this is another question to the entire panel. Do you think it the right step to stop investing in future technologies at this moment in order to save jobs and focus on core products?
No, if I can, no, of course not. I don't think so at all. There's been research done following both the recent financial crises that the companies who take the moment of crisis to invest in new technology and innovation and things like staff training and stuff come out better. So it's the scared snail reaction of just pulling in your shell, cutting off expenditure and things like that, I think is too inward focus. That's not the right reaction in my view. And research has shown it.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like an either or proposition for mine. That you can do both, and I think it's just I think after the initial shock of like this thing unfolding, I think companies are starting to understand that there is a future and they need to be a part of it, and so they're starting to allocate resources to that end.
Next question. Do you, what are you doing to be inclusive to groups who might be more excluded than ever? For example, like poor or no internet connection, low technical literacy, and even different languages. This is to the entire panel.
Maybe I can try to take this. We work a lot with organizations on the Western Balkans. So these are countries like Kosovo, Macedonia, Albania, still very much developing countries with recent war histories, a lot of them. So I think it qualifies the question, like, you know, I mean, I don't want to generalize. Obviously, there are amazing developments coming from these countries, and they are very literate people and you know, fluent in foreign languages and all of that. But it happens that in these countries there are also a higher concentration of NGOs, and my recommendation would be to work for these NGOs, to work with these NGOs, and to transfer your skills, your knowledge, to build capacity within these NGOs, service design capacity, agility, etc. We have a rule of thumb: when we work with NGOs, we work at 50% discount, which is literally, you know, we're losing money, but we have to do it because this is a way to, because they're closer to the people that qualify for, you know, for no internet connection, low tech literacy. And this is at least our recipe: work with the local NGOs. It's good for your team. Your team will not lose. It will get invigorated by working with NGOs and, you know, doing some good, and just build capacity within the NGOs. They know what they're doing. They're closer to the problem, so they can how do you say this, extrapolate the impact.
Awesome. Anyone else want to add to that question? Okay. So we have one last question to Jesse and Martin. Do businesses perceive service design as a nice to have or mission critical right now? And how accurate or inaccurate is that perception?
I think, I mean, from my view, I think that of course differs by the maturity of a business, the recognition of service design, whether service design is even seen in their industry as something their competitors are doing, and whether they've seen value of it themselves. If it's an unknown quantity that they're looking to cut back on activities or investments, then they probably wouldn't. I think if they've seen the proven value of what we do, they might well stick with it because they see how many parts of an organization that we touch. So, and of course, the second part of the question, yes, I think we're all here to say that we think it's important, but the reaction on individual companies is probably down to their awareness of it, the recognition of it, and whether they've seen success by applying it. Otherwise, for many companies, it's still an unknown, and they might not put value on it.
Yeah, I would think that like it's certainly companies, as we've spoken about, there is this kind of really very tactical short-term kind of viewpoint right now, and that makes sense. And so I think, you know, when it comes to the very big, broad kind of blue sky thinking, I don't think we've seen a lot of that. I think what we've actually seen though is we've had people look at what's on the shelf and seen, okay, there's some really good thinking here. How can we develop this? Because I think there is the delivery times aren't, you know, the timescales have gotten shorter. Things that aren't getting to market soon are being deprioritized. So I think it's potentially there's more tactical and potentially smaller service design projects that are out there.
Great. Does anyone want to add to that? Okay, that's all the questions that we have, Ivan.
I'd just like to ask one question, if I may. It's going to be a very brief one. I'm quite interested and to the whole panel. What are the new dimensions we need to consider in design as a result of COVID? So one thing off the top of my head, and I think I listened to something by Bernard Salt, he was basically saying that in the future we would have to design separately for people who are vulnerable versus people who are not. And this is not only an age thing, it's, as we know, that there's quite a few variables in the mix. So what else are we going to consider in this new normal when designing? Does anyone have a view on that?
I mean, I actually think it's a really good point raised with the earlier question around designing for people who potentially don't have great technical literacy or internet kind of connections. I think that like what enables us to keep doing what we're doing is we're very connected people, and typically and compared to large sections of the population, we're fairly fluent with technology. And I think that for people in that position, things will be okay, because you know we're this is the gift that we have with technology these days. But I think that's it will exacerbate the gap between people who are technically fluent, technically able, globally plugged in, and those who aren't. And you know, you see it, you know, in regards to kind of essential workers who have to go to work, who have to put themselves in a higher risk than those of us who are lucky enough to be able to work from home. And I think that's the big divide that I can see opening up, and I don't know when that's going to close.
I think an extension to that, Martin, is it's even more paramount now to how intuitive, how effective, and how the baseline needs to change in design for the lowest common denominator. So inclusive design is a great thing to say, but more than ever, to Martin's point, it's actually critical now as designers. We think about this when we're designing.
I can add maybe one more thought too, and I think this is perhaps a positive way to end it. As service designers, I think we're sitting in a very good position to help influence what happens next in society. We take our users' perspective, we take our customers' perspective, but at the heart of what we do, we're always designing for the future, and that future is unknown, but our skills, our techniques, our mindset is really well suited to help people plan for that future and have some influence on what it looks like. So if we take that weight on our shoulders and we try to apply that to the uncertain situation, but also everyone's desire to make a better future, yeah, we have a good responsibility to bear, but I think we have some power as well. So I think that's quite positive.
Thank you, Jesse. I love ending on a good positive note. Thank you for this, and it's I totally agree. It's so true. I think this will be a wrap for tonight. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This is in short what we covered today. We went through quite a lot, so I think the fact that we're recording this will be awesome, because I'm excited to share that with the wider community. If you want to get in touch, please join the Service Design Melbourne Slack. We have an ongoing discussion about anything to do with COVID, all the trends and so forth. So there's a dedicated COVID-19 channel. To get access to the Service Design Melbourne Slack, you need to send us an email. The email is below, and if you want to get in touch with me, just reach out on LinkedIn. So thank you all, and that's all from us. Have a really good night. Ciao.
Bye-bye,
Very
everyone.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ciao for now.
Bye.